Hi everyone, welcome to part 3 of the Snow Leopard tutorial. This part sees us starting to build the fur texture. Part 1 was the eyes, part 2 was colour blocking the underpainting, and part 3 is adding the fur texture. Now this is approximately 11 hours of video compressed into just over an hour and a half. So you'll appreciate there's a few little snippets that are real time. This is 2 times speed. Hopefully you can see from this exactly what I'm doing, but obviously in places I've speeded it up so it is a lot quicker. But it is, again, once you understand the start of the process, it's the same technique that we use throughout. If you want to slow this down, just click on open and watch via YouTube, and there is a little option on there to watch it at half speed. You can slow it down yourself whichever way you play it back. Obviously the sound won't come through, it'll sound a little bit strange at half speed, but you can slow the video down and mute it. So, as with all of my fur, think about how one layer of fur lies on top of another. You don't want to be drawing in the fur in the foreground, so say around the muzzle, and working your way back. You want to start at the point the furthest away, so then each layer that you draw lays on top of the previous layer, just like the natural fur does. So first of all, rotating here between exactly the same colours as we used initially. We've got our warm grey, we've got a dark indigo, black, raw umber. So where we've colour blocked the underpainting in to fill quite a bit of the tooth, say we're halfway through filling the tooth, and we would have been going down and literally just keeping our pencil on the paper backwards and forwards, or circular motion, scumbling to build up the underpainting. Now we start to put down fur strokes. So super sharp pencils. And you'll see I start at the point furthest away. Here I just do this little test area to make sure I'm happy with how it's going to go down. So I put down, we've got our nice dark shadows that we've created before. We've got our lovely colours for our mid-tones there as well. So now we go in, we put down a layer of fur texture furthest away, and then we flick our darks and our mid-tones out over that, and then we come forward. You'll see here, let's do it from here. So we've got our undertones there. I'm starting to flick in with a sharp pencil, and I tend to push away. I put my pencil down, you'll see I flick upwards and flick away. So I'll do it with my lightest hairs first of all. And you can see that I'm working from where that next stripe is, just forward of that first layer of fur. You see where the dark stripe is, so the white fur or grey fur is flicking out of that dark recess. We flick up and away, and then once we've done that layer, then we move forwards, and then we flick the dark fur back up over that light layer. It all makes sense, honestly. So I'm rotating between my lightest pencils. I've got my white, just using the Polychromos. I've got my warm grey. You'll see I flick upwards. I do come down, you pull it down as well into the dark recess, but we're going to flick that dark recess back up over that fur again in a second. So here we go. So we're just flicking up first of all with our dark indigo. And then we'll go in with our black. Just pull some of those shadows back down behind, a little bit of defining behind that fur. And then we flick up out of that black stripe shadow up over the top. It's just a case of practice. You put pressure down on when you first put the pencil down on the papers. So think about a shaft of hair, fur. It's thicker usually at one end than it is at the other. So where it comes out of the follicle hair growth, it's thicker and it can wisp away. So you put your pencil down quite firmly, and then you flick, and as you flick away, you lift up from the paper. So you see here, literally, I'm just that lovely dark shadow at the back. I flick that white and grey fur up over the top. I've gone into the next black stripe just above where now I'm popping in some of the raw umber that we've lost from our midtones when we started putting in the fur strokes. If you find you're putting the pencil down and you haven't got enough underpainting there, it'll go on quite grainy. So just come back out of this, pop in a few more, build up your undertone, your underlayers a little bit more until you're happy with them, and then do a little test area like I did to start with on the left hand side to make sure that the fur texture is going to go down and create and not be all fuzzy and the lines be all like it's gone down on sandpaper basically and be grainy. You want them flicking through like lovely soft fur. So it is a case now of just repeating exactly like we've done that little test area up there. Got my dark sepia as well here I'm mixing in for one of my darks coming out of the shadows. But like I say, we're just using those same pencils again that we use for the underpainting. So see, I've got that layer of white fur there now, grey fur, silver fur, and then I find my next stripe down and I flick back up. So like I said at the beginning, if you started this with the fur around the eyes and then worked your way backwards, you'd be trying to draw the fur in behind. Imagine if you had all that white fluffy fur there up over the recess of the ear, and you put all that in first and you had no dark shadow behind it, then you have to go in and somehow try and get that shadow underneath. So understand again now why I get you to put all your darks and your midtones down on that underpainting and to bring it to real nice depth of contrast. If you don't have that depth there, when you flick that those white fur, grey fur texture, those hairs up over the top, there's no shadow for them to sit on. Once you do it, usually when I show people this in a little demonstration at workshops, it sinks in then of like, okay, we understand what you're asking us to do. If those, like I say, if that dark shadow isn't there, then when I try and flick white fur texture over the top, there's just nothing for it to sit on. So study your fur. Like I say here, I've got the dark indigo again. You'll see me rotate with the dark indigo. If you could see that nice raw umber, that lovely yellowy browny colour as well, little touches of that. Every time you lose a touch of your umber or your indigo, pop it back in. And obviously we're using white and black here, but we're softening the white back with grey. On the lower half, the right hand side, which is much warmer, we'll soften it back not only with warm grey but also with our ivory. But we will also soften back our black with our dark indigo and also our dark sepia. So once we get this top left hand side done, we won't complete around the eye. We'll get some of it done up around the eye again, a little bit, almost like a little bit of experimenting to see how far I need to push it to get my whites in it, but it won't be finished. We'll finish this above the brow area later on. It's mainly to get that top left hand side, the fur above flicking out over the recess of the left ear. We'll then repeat that on the right hand side. If you remember on the second video, I explained how this cat was not looking straight on at me. She was turning her head away from her body, hence why it's not a symmetrical image with the way the fur is lying. So on the left hand side you see more of the recess of the ear and the fur flicking up. over the top. On the right hand side, it's more where she's twisting away, the ears pull back, so you don't see that recess of the ears so much. It's more just the fur flicking up away. Do you see here, just playing around with this eye? Look at the length of your fur strokes as well, really steady. This is where a lot of mistakes get made. Your fur strokes are not the same all over. If you look at a cat or a dog, you'll see on the muzzle, when we get to the muzzle later, we use a completely different technique. But the eyebrows are going to be long. Then the fur can go in quite short again as it goes further up over the brow. And then obviously you've got the long wispy bits of fur that come out over the top of the ear. The ears themselves will usually be shorter fur. Down over the muzzle, really, really short stubbly fur. Underneath the eye, going out over the cheek, it'll be quite directional, again very short, and it'll also follow the contours. Again, think about the contour, the anatomy of the cat, the skull shape. Think about your direction of the fur and keep checking back to your reference photo all the time. Try not to follow my artwork, try to follow the reference photo. My artwork is obviously my interpretation of the reference photo. It's not photorealism, it's just my interpretation in my style. Your style will be your style. So I want you to work as much as possible from the reference photo, following the technique that I teach you. Hopefully that makes sense. Otherwise, your drawing will become unnaturally a very diffused sort of copy of my work, and you might be forcing yourself to work in a style or to create something that isn't quite your natural style. See here, just under the eye, again, it's just like still testing that paper. How much can I build up under there? We want to create a lovely smooth area under that eye that later on we can just go in with super sharp pencils and a nice heavy pressure and really flick and add the texture of the fur in that cheek. But again, we'll come back to that. We're working our way forward, so we'll do top left ear, then the top right of what we can see of the ear. Work a little bit across the top of the brow, but then we'll come down and we'll do the bottom left ruff and mane, the bottom right ruff and mane, and then I believe it'll be possibly our chin, and we do our cheeks, and then we come forward and we do our muzzle and our nose. So we work our way forwards on the cat. Here, like I say, I'm just testing that paper around there, building up the texture so that I know later on what I need, how far I need to push it on the right hand side as well. But using pressure, if you've done the pressure, I'm going to do another pressure test video as well for you, hopefully this week and get up. I know the original one is for watercolour pencils. It's still applicable to how I use my Polychromos. You see here, I've just gone in there with a white Pablo just to see how much it'll enhance. I'm swapping between my white Pablo and my white Polychromo. Both give slightly different effects, that's why. And where you've got it, maybe too much white goes down, you just cut back into it then, like say with your dark indigo or your black, to put the shadows back in around the hairs. Soften the whites with your grey, pop back in a little bit of your raw umber if you've lost that as well. So I've done a good test area there now, and I'm quite happy that, yep, it's starting to thicken up nicely. I know how many layers I can get down there. In a way, this is sort of really good just for your creative. If you get that top corner done or close to completion, you get a sense of the feeling of the fur, the different textures of the fur. You can see there, top left, how wispy, wiry that is. Then it softens into quite shorter fur, and then the directional fur over that top of the top brow, and then literally the skin almost, the white on the inner edge coming up away from the stop of the nose up into the brow, how that is literally just short, really like short, tiny fur over the skin itself. So we flicked across to the right hand side. We're just going to repeat the process over here. So we'll go in every time, let's say if you, same as we were doing with the underpainting, if you find you're putting your directional strokes on, and when you put your light, so your whites or your greys on, if it comes through really grainy, knock it back, do another little bit more of underpainting, but just do it using fur strokes, directional fur strokes, and gradually build that thickness. It'll, like I say, it'll gradually build, and each time you'll refine it a little bit more, you'll put in a little bit more detail of the fur, and it'll gradually build, like I say, and become really thick and luxurious, just like fur. There's no myth really behind how you create fur. Everyone can do it. It's just practice, understanding the logic behind the technique. I know people approach it differently as well. Like I say, I've just got a logical head and I approach it this way, that fur naturally needs to layer on top of the previous layer. So I work from the back forwards. Over on this right hand side, I say it's a lot warmer. There's a lot more ochre through there. There isn't the flicky up. She's twisted her ear here, so it's not the inside of the ear that we're seeing on this right hand side. So all the same colours over here. We've got our warm grey, our raw umber, our black, our indigo. And just started, like I say, getting a good foundation in the direction of the fur up along that right hand corner. But we're working from the edges inwards. And I mentioned it as well, I think, in the second video. Don't worry too much about her markings. If you get a little bit lost with the markings, or they start to take on a little bit of your own interpretation, so be it. You don't have to go around showing everyone the original reference photo. It can just be based on that reference photo. Mine, if you pop it up next to the reference, it's not going to be exactly the same. It's my interpretation. So it's not, especially if you're using this as a way of practicing how to build fur, how to see fur, how to see colours, how to create texture. I say it to all of my students, don't put pressure on her to be perfect at absolutely everything all in one go. Choose what you want to achieve from starting a piece, especially if you're quite new to it all. So don't go in there looking for complete perfection. But go, right, okay, I want to achieve from this my depth of contrast, improve my layering and get it to look a little bit like fur. That's, so set that as a target. Or you want to get a really good likeness, or you want to achieve all your different textures as a fur. Do you know what I mean? Just choose your real priority and aim for that, and let everything else sit around it. I mean, I know when I create a commission, top of my priority isn't always the likeness, it's the character, which you don't see often in the photo. That's come from a description, and understanding the bond between, the relationship between your subject and their owner. So that is something I project into a piece, or I could be working from 2 or 3 different reference photos. So you're looking for the interpretation, and using artistic license and skill to create something that's not there in your original reference sometimes. It's pulling together lots of ideas, feelings, emotions, as well as creating a likeness. Not an exact copy, necessarily. I'm waffling, aren't I? Sorry. Okay, so we've got a dark sepia in here again. I do pull in one of the dark warm greys as well. I'll double check if it's number 4 or number 5. It's one of the deeper ones. I keep it there as well. So here again now I'm just using my warm grey. To be honest, I'm mapping in again now. So where we've got all of our spots and dimples and little bits of stripes and splodges and what have you, I'm just working away around them now because they're still quite crude. They're still literally blobs. So I just want to break them up again now. So I'm going to add some texture around it. And all I'm doing is just squiggling little squiggles of pencil all the way over that area. So it's not flicky fur. It's literally put your pencil down, a little squiggle, and you leave a little chunk of fur there. You're not trying to do little flicky fur strokes here because it's completely different fur. And it's almost facing you as well, like the fur is turning towards you. So it looks really stumpy rather than it's been stroked up in a direction. Over the eyes here, it is directional because we can see it flicking up and away. So that's the important thing with this project, is identifying and translating all of the different fur textures that you can see, as well as the colours, as well as the hues, the shades, the values, the textures. It all comes eventually. It all comes really naturally. And here as well, right at the end, I do use the knife on this piece as well. So because I've worked using the anthracite Pastelmat, I will keep that in mind. So right at the end, all those you see there, I've zoomed in, and you can still see how grainy it is there. It's a huge difference to when we first started out with our underpainting, how grainy it was though. But now it's starting to cut through it and create fur texture now. So where I've gone in and done a layer of light, I'm now going in with a mid-tone, going back in with that umber. You'll see now that I've done that, just how much that area has softened up. And it's starting to create really soft tonal fluff almost underneath what we can then go back in with our lights and our darks to create the texture. This is just creating soft depth, getting rid of the rest of that tooth. Putting that layer of light down underneath has meant that next layer of umber that's gone in there has gone down quite true. And it's beautiful and rich as well. So dark sepia now just going in over the top. Creating a little bit of contour there. I'm not really worrying about my texture, you see. I'm still getting in. It's still almost like underpainting. Still building on those first layers that we were putting in. I'm going to get a stopwatch. I need to order a stopwatch and I'll have it on screen so that you can see when I speed things up exactly where we are in the process. Because this is at 8 times speed now, so we're probably just on this portion of the video, which was 11 hours long. Just trying to work it out. Well, we're at least like a good couple of hours in. Possibly 3 hours in here. Okay, so we've done our lights, we've gone back to our mid-tones, we popped in some dark indigo again, so now we're going back in with our super sharp pencils. Popped in a little bit of fur texture with our light grey again. Now we're just going back in where we've almost softened back the shadows too much. We just pop those in again. And remember again as well, I will up the contrast on the final conversion of this video, but my light is above this table and when I was working, so this is looking a lot duller, a lot more dull and a lot not fuzzier, but a lot softer than it actually is in reality. It loses a lot of the contrast and obviously the texture. When I put a scan through, you'll see the scans popping up on the sides as I work of the screen. As I work my way through, I make sure I get the scans popping up on the sides for you. And obviously those of you with on Patreon with the $10 reward tier and above, you will have access, once it's written, you'll have access this week as well to the written downloadable tutorial, which will have all of the individual scans and step-by-steps of the process in there to refer to, as well as some close-ups of me actually working. So you see there how I've done, working my way in from that top right corner, that right hand side, up over the brow, and now we're starting to build some actual texture into there now, putting in sort of like defined fur strokes now over the top of all of our colours and all of our dark shadows. We're also breaking up where we had the black stripes, and we'll have, we've got the spots obviously on the forehead. We're starting to break those up now, and they're becoming more textures like clumps of fur rather than spots sitting on top of the fur. We're showing the fur growth and how those spots flick up into the layer underneath, and then the next here especially you see the light layer of fur flicking over the top of those darker areas. I'm just repeating myself, I know. That's the hard thing with these videos, is sort of you just end up, we're using the same technique, but we're using it in a different area. So I sound very repetitive. So again here, I'm doing little squiggles. You see here, little dots of fur to create the texture rather than the flicky, longer fur that we had. This is the ivory going in here as well now. So it's much warmer, much creamier. White is way too harsh for this, over this lovely mid-tone, the umber. Now the warm grey. Okay, so we're going to start to work some of those spots there now as well. You see how many times we've worked this area. We didn't bring it to completion in the first sweep or the second sweep or the third or the fourth, so we've been in here several times now. With each one, we can knock some of the texture back again by adding in colour and depth of shadow, and then now we're getting to the point where we're starting to add in actual texture over the top. So here we've just gone back to where we first started, top left hand side, and just making sure that that transitions nicely in over the forehead there, where we'd stopped at that original point before we moved over to the right hand side. It's just making sure that it all blends in nicely across there and that the markings kind of match up to where we originally planned them for. You see the dark sepia and also the warm dark warm fives. Sorry, the dark warm greys cut through the lights of the fur texture here, rather than black is a little bit too harsh to go in with. Indigo's nice, but the sepia and the warm dark greys work much nicer here. Same as you use your lights. White is too harsh on this fur at the front. You're going to be using your ivory and your warm grey. I think again I mentioned it in the previous video, the underpainting one, that I was so close to using a light flesh in some of the areas. I use light flesh a lot, but it wasn't quite there. The warm greys over the raw umber seemed to just catch it. So that's completed the top area for now. We're moving down to this bottom left. And now I remember the bottom left, bottom right, completely different fur texture again. It's very long fur here. I've just got the indentation tool here, just marking back in some of those whiskers before we get going. So down here we do quite a bit more colour blocking in the direction of the fur, just making sure our markings are in place, popping in our shadows. I mean, even on the first couple of sweeps of this, where we look like we've brought it up to close to completion, we go in closer to the end and we rework all of this area so much. So we've gone in with popped in the raw umber again, popped in a little bit of our shadow. We're softening it all back now with our warm grey. A little touch of white in our brightest areas just to pull it all up. But again, we'll knock all of this back again. This is literally because we need to build much more depth of pigment over here, so the texture's coming through way too much of the paper. The tooth is still coming through way too much. Could probably use a blending tool or something down here as well, but I don't like to crush the tooth of the paper. Probably use like a stiff brush just to push the pigment in and blend it a lot more. But I just wanted to show that we can just do this by using pencils. That's the whole point of this tutorial, is that we're just using dry pencils. We add a little touch of ink when we do the whiskers later on, but this is, let's say, this is teaching fur texture using a limited palette of pencils and just building layers and showing that the pencils can blend with the layers, the previous layers. You don't need any other tools. You don't need any solvents, mineral spirits, blending powder, anything like that. Just use your pencils. Okay, so where we built up all those lights, now we've gone in with some of our sepia and we've marked back in some of our shadows. Now we're going in with another layer of light, a little bit more pressure just to build this up. As soon as you work, so even though I'm using my lights there as well, it's still starting to project the chin forward, and without realising, because we're not even looking at the chin when we're drawing it, we're just focusing on that little area that we're working on. So we've popped back in our lightest parts. We're going back in now with our black and just marking in dark areas. This will get softened back again and then highlighted again. We've lost the shadows underneath there, so we're just popping a hint of those back in again. You can see the difference there now with how many layers we've popped down in that bottom left hand corner, as opposed to that chunk just further up on the left hand side and also to the right hand side. It just shows now, like I say, you can't go in there with 1 or 2 layers and expect to have the texture that you want. You've got to be patient and keep going back in and building. And again, we're just using the same pencils again. We're using our white, our black, our dark indigo, and our raw umber. We'll bring in some of the burnt ochre as well up around the cheek later on, just where we've got some real nice little orangey touches, just little flecks of it. Now we've gone in with our light over that, I call that the rough area. The rough of the neck, where because we're going up towards the cheek sits just below the eye socket there. So if we call this like the rough, then going down into our neck, our mane, you can see that with each layer that we put on there, this will really soften it back now. As soon as we go in, we've got to put a light down. As soon as we go in with this lovely raw umber again now, it'll really start to soften and smooth. And then we're getting close to the point where we can start cutting through with our sharp pencils and creating that fur texture. You'll see here again how loose I'm holding that dark indigo. It's just still not putting in fur strokes. I'm still just really colour blocking. There's a lot of shadow needs to go down underneath where those whiskers will be coming out later on as well. So here I've just taken a step back. I'm going in quite loose again and just popping in everywhere that I need a little bit of that dark indigo. So this is what comes from, remember what I said about stepping away from your drawings, coming back with fresh eyes, whether it's like a 10-minute break, half an hour for a cup of tea, a couple of hours, you know, take the dogs for a walk, get some fresh air, or even a couple of days. I know there's a couple of occasions on this one where I did take a couple of days out quite close to the end, where I needed a couple of really good pushes to take her forwards. Okay, so we've moved over to the right hand side now. That left hand side's not been brought to completion yet, but the foundation's there, the fur is there, the build-up's just right. We can go back in and really put in the rest of the texture and the details later on. So we've moved over to the right hand side, lots of umber going down here. And we'll go down to the bottom right hand side. Once we've done a bit more of the colour blocking and increase the intensity of our darks and some of our mid-tones, go down to this bottom right hand corner. That needs to be really dark, and then we'll be flicking a different texture fur there. It's, if you look at your reference photo, it's quite, I call it woolly almost. It's not flicky fur hairs like we've got top left hand corner. It's almost what I call like woolly fur, so it's little clumps stuck together. It's not, we don't want bright white fur down here either, so it'll be grey, and the umber will be creating the look of that clumpy fur over our super darks down in that bottom right hand corner. It starts to become lovely and soft again once we come up to that rough area on the right hand side. But again, the same as we did on the left hand side, we need to still build on our underpainting first of all before we start creating the texture. It might have been easier, I guess, if this was a symmetrical piece, because we could have just worked the right hand side exactly the same as the left, which would have meant it would have gone a lot quicker because we've already worked through, felt our way through exactly how that left hand side's working. We could probably then have worked on both sides at the same time and built them up at the same rate. So the same as I did on the left hand side, I've just gone up over that rough with my white. You could just go up there with the ivory if you want it a little bit softer, or one of your light warm greys. So I'm just using the side, the nib of the pencil again. So it's not texture we're really putting in, it's still colour blocking quite loosely in the direction of the fur. There you go, going back in there again now. That sepia has just really knocked the shadow back in there again. There's your dark indigo again, just popping back in some more of your mid to dark tones. There's the burnt ochre that I mentioned before as well. Just little hints of it. I just started, it's weird, as I was working on it, I didn't originally pull out burnt ochre to use, but as I was working on it, I just felt in places that the umber wasn't quite hitting the mark, and it needed a tiny lift of the ochre in there as well. Obviously, we work over it, we soften it back. We'll pull the ochre out a little bit later in the cheeks, a tiny bit as well. So now we've got quite a good texture down in that corner. So I'm starting to go in now and break up the shapes. Starting to pull the fur out. Drawing around those clumps. Creating the shadow around those clumps. Got the grey in here as well now, so it uses the highlights for those little woolly clumps of fur. And where the grey works over the dark indigo and into the ochre, when you've got a lovely layer of build-up of the pigment there, it starts to become really smooth, and you see that blending process going on, the mixing of the palette and with your own eyes. Okay, so we've got the start again. We've got some of the caput mortem coming in here now as well. Now you can see that fur texture starting to build, and you can also see how completely different it is to the left-hand side. If you just looked at a snippet of that bottom right, you might even think that belonged to a tiger rather than a snow leopard, because it almost looks like stripes around that edge. So see, I've got the ivory here instead of the white, just flicking down over and creating the highlights in that clumpy fur. It's really starting to create that texture there, lovely now. Softening back some of the areas that are a little bit too light. Where we lost with all those those lights going in, we've just gone back, tiny touch of burnt ochre went back in again there and then. Now we can go back in again with our dark, our black, really start to emphasize those tiny shadows of the stripes and the spots underneath. And then we go back in with our light and just flick some of that fur. But you see really what I was explaining about working from the point furthest away forward. So I've done that bottom right hand corner, and I'm working my way up under the chin, up to over that to that ruff. Each layer sits on top of the previous one. Tiny bit of the caput mortem there going through. And it's the caput mortem as opposed to the caput mortem violet. The violet is a little bit too cool for this. We want to keep those shades down that bottom right hand side all the way through, to be honest, to be quite warm. There's only really quite cold whites that we use on the brightest highlights. I say left hand side of this chin, up over the left eye, and on the fur of the ruff on the bottom left hand side as well. So we're starting to work up over the ruff on both sides. We've brought them up pretty much both to the same level now. I'd say maybe that right hand area needs a little bit more work to bring it up to the same as the left hand side. But I remember here I was itching to get to the cheeks. I really so wanted the cheeks to be done, but I knew that I had to be patient really and get these ruffs, that collar of fur around underneath the cheeks done first. So patience being the key again. See here, as much as I work, because I'm working my pencil at an angle as well, you can still see those indentations from the whiskers that I created right back at the beginning, and then I enhanced when we started this process. I used that indentation tool once again. Yep, so that right hand side needed more pigment going down on there just to fill that tooth, start to soften it. So we've lifted it all back up to light, going back in now with our umber. And see, we've gone back in with our darks, put back in our spot shapes again, and going back in again with our lights, exactly like we've done, like say on the top part of the process. Build your layers, build the pigment. Then when you've got it lovely and smooth, that's when you can start cutting back through and adding in your texture. So we're reasonably happy with where we brought that right hand ruff up to now. Obviously it's not finished. We work the whole lot from top to bottom later on, so we've moved across now to start working this muzzle area. So going in with our lights first of all, and obviously where we pull anything up too light, we'll go back in with our mid-tones. We'll go back in, obviously the spots again are very crude, all these markings that we initially put in. And we'll start to drag those in and out of each other and build up that texture as we go along. Obviously as well, I've tried to limit the palette for this tutorial, but if there's any of the colours that you can't quite match, if you don't have the raw umber, you've got other colours that you can use. You can use maybe like the brown ochre, or you've got the beast, or even the nougat. They're all in there. You just might have to mix them a tiny bit differently with your warm greys and with your ivory. Same as you've got your walnut brown as well. If you haven't got your caput mortem, you don't have to stick to the exact palette that I use. Like here, we're just going up with little touches of the burnt ochre. It's going to take quite a lot to work this area. If you see, now we've zoomed in, you can see how grainy the Pastelmat is there still, and how much of that tooth that we still need to lose. So we're going to still, there's pretty much underpainting here. It's just that we're doing it in a much tighter form, and we are kind of following fur direction and thinking about texture. or the texture that's going to come in, in that next part of the process. So we're just working the right hand side of this muzzle first of all. Popping a little bit of our shadows using our dark indigo. Even just watching this back now, I can see how rough some of these pencil marks are going down. So don't worry, you put your darks in and you can just burnish or glaze over the top with your lighter colours, and it just softens it all back. It's a good way of creating soft, dark texture. Is put your darks down and then just glaze or burnish over the top with your mid-tone or your light. See here, I'm going to go over now with my grey. So all those little black marks that I put in, we just soften them back now, so they sink back. And if you want to soften them more, you can just go in with a a lighter colour, go in with a mid-tone. They don't have to stay as harsh as when you put them down. Again, that's one of the joys of using the Pastelmat as well. It allows you to do so many layers. So like I mentioned just now about if you don't have the colours that I used, you don't have to use them. Try and find something similar. I say it again with all of my tutorials. If you don't see the same colours as me, this is my colour palette, remember, this is my interpretation, my translation. If you see something completely different, do it completely different. If you want to do this snow leopard in psychedelic colours, that is entirely up to you. It's the technique of building the fur that I'm trying to show you. As long as you follow the theory of darks, midtones and lights, it doesn't matter really what your colour choice is. It'd be quite interesting to see him in, see her in some prettier colours. But obviously if you're going for a more realistic drawing, then these are the closest match that I could find to my photo and how I saw my photo on my tablet, my screen. Even at workshops, so everyone can have their iPads and their tablets, and each screen, the colours can look completely different. So I can go around and say, well, yeah, this is the palette of colours that I've chosen, and then you look on someone else's screen, those colours aren't coming through on their screen. But you have to have a starting point for tutorials, for workshops, for creating this video, this piece. All I can do is say, well, this is how the image looks to me, these are the colours that I saw, and this is what I used. If I used a different colour range, if I turned it to pinks and purples, I would still use the same technique to build my underpainting, build up my layers, and start to create texture. Okay, so we've moved over to the left-hand side of the muzzle now. Starting to build this up. So we're almost an hour into this hour-and-a-half video. So I'm guessing we're about, if we think about the overall video, we're about 3.5, about 7 hours in of drawing from when this video first started. So in this hour, we're about 7 hours in here. I didn't achieve this in 55 minutes. Wow, if I did, I'd be churning out pieces every single day. It wasn't until I added all the video up, actually, I was quite surprised at how long this one did take me. I knew she did take me a little bit longer than I expected, and also I had to take a break from her because my eyes were so tired, I just couldn't see for looking. I was putting myself under too much pressure to try and finish her to a deadline. So I know that the videos are coming through a tiny bit late again this month, and also the written tutorial, but I'd rather get it right for you than rush not be happy with the piece myself and try and push something that's, you know, well, it's not perfect, but, you know, something that's far less than perfect for you guys to learn from. You'll notice here as well my pencils are not super sharp. That's because I'm back to pretty much colour blocking over here, and I just want to fill the tooth of the paper, working from lights to darks, midtones, back to lights, darks, midtones, just repeating. Popping back in any detail that we lost, any shadow that we've gone over with our lights and we need to intensify again. Again, if your little spots, if your whiskers get a tiny bit out of place, fine, they're a tiny bit out of place. As long as they look okay, don't panic too much about it. Don't, you know, whatever you do, don't try starting to rub out. If you notice no erasers involved in any of my my work, you can just correct any mistakes from a previous layer with your next layers. You could just, if I wanted to erase some of these spots still, I could still go in there with a white or a light grey, and eradicate them and move them, and put them back in somewhere else. It's a good thing, like I say, with the Pastelmat, it's so forgiving. You get so many chances to put things right, move them around, tweak them, or not. Just putting in hints of the nose there. We'll do the nose later on as well. You'll see me every now and again just going in and laying my pencil down on the drawing. And I do that to my reference and I move across to my drawing just to make sure I've got placement, angles, a spot one side's matching up to another, the left hand side of that nostril's matching up with the other. Okay, so now we're going back in. And we're quite happy now with some of our texture, our underpainting. So now we're going in and starting to put in fur, the direction of the fur, being much more careful and more precise. Using our white Polychromo here. And instantly you see how much now that projects the shape of that muzzle forwards towards us. Again, we still need to go back in and add back in texture. Depending on how much pressure you use with this white, see I've used more pressure at the front, less pressure around this side. We don't want it the same flat level of white or grey or anything, because it will just flatten it out. So coming down now to the chin. Knocked it back with indigo. We're doing our colour blocking again, remember? See what I said as well about how I lined things up with my pencil. I was doing it just then with my raw umber pencil. It's got a lovely shadow in underneath there, but we do need textured fur, little hints of fur as well. So we're putting our dark indigo. I could put mortem, umber and a touch of ochre in there before we then go in with our warm grey, and now our white, just to start putting in some fur texture. So now before I flick that chin fur out over our neck fur, we just needed to create a little bit more shadow there. We'll probably do a little bit more as well though before we try and flick the white fur texture of the chin out over the left hand side there. Right hand side is lovely, lovely soft hue there already. And you see here as well, this white is certainly all merged and become quite blocky. So I need to break that up again now with the next steps. So it's just become quite flat there. So we need to go back in and break that up. So you see we've used the white on the left hand side where the light's hitting it the most. And it's cooler. And the right hand side we used our warm grey to flick out over on that side. Little highlights now going in on that side with the white, but we can soften it back. Now you can start to see how having that dark, here it really shows how having that dark shadow underneath really works when we flick our lightest sharp pencils out over the top. This is why we need those darks in place before we can do this. See, more repeating of myself. I should just have my voice playing on a loop. And repeat, and repeat. Okay, so we've lightened pretty much all of that area now, and we're going to have to knock some of it back. And also, where this white pencil has merged and gone blocky, we also need to break that up. But you see the intensity now of how much pigment has gone into that chin. Okay, so we can cut back now up into some of that shadow fur. So black will be a little bit too harsh all over, but in there we've got some lovely dark shadows that we lost. We need to just get those back in first of all, and tiny hints of the spots obviously on the chin. And again, like I said before, depending on how much pressure you use is to how intense you make that black as you're working this. So use it lighter and then use a couple more layers before you start pushing it a little bit harder maybe. Don't go in there really, really hard pressure first of all. I say with my pencils, they kind of dance in front of my eyes. That's what they do. So they play a little performance. They don't follow the same steps all the time. They're always doing slightly different movements with slightly different pressure at a slightly different tempo. And they dance their way over the painting. So now I've gone in with that burnt ochre again, like we started out with. Just broken some of that up now. I could put mortem there as well, just breaking it up a little bit. Back in with our warm grey. If I remember rightly, was that those spots on the mid to right section of the chin, they just weren't quite sitting in the same place. And I think in the end I just kind of accepted, okay, they're not quite right. They look fine. They can stay where they are. They're not quite the right shape. They're not quite in the right place, but they're fine. They don't look odd. Unless someone, let's say, is matching them to the reference photo, they don't look odd. They're fine. So there's a little hint of sort of, you know, of how I don't worry too much. Obviously, if it's a commission piece, then, yep, placement is more critical. But for this, it's teaching technique rather than how to literally copycat or be photorealistic. It's artwork at the end of the day. So I was just taking a quick photo there for you to pop up into the tutorial as well. My phone sometimes pops in because I take pictures on my phone. I take pictures with the camera as well from above. Okay, so now we flicked back out to the cheeks. Well, cheeks, the rough again now. Starting to really, really push the layers of that pigment now, because as we work each area and we build up the layers of pigment, it then means that a previous area that we've worked on might look like there's lots less pigment there. So we then need to go back in and pull those back up to match our latest layers as well, if that makes sense. basically it's all a case of working and balancing all the time. I know some people like to work, like I said before, about bringing an area, say a 2-inch area or an inch square area, to completion before they move on to the next area. I don't work like that. I work more like a painter, so that you're constantly balancing the piece. And then, like I say, right at the end, there'll be another top to bottom rework if it's needed. So I bring each area to sort of like on with this video anyway, each area will be brought to about sort of 90% completion, 80 to 90%, and then it gives me an allowance then to go back in, and when I've done all the other areas around it, I can then go back in and tweak and add and make sure the whole piece balances. So here I am working around where, or I was working around where the shadow is needed for those whiskers to set over the top of later on. But I've moved now up to the cheek. So first of all, obviously we need to tie it in again, like we transitioned the top left-hand corner across to the top of the forehead because they've been worked at different times. We're just bringing down the left-hand side of that eye down towards the cheek and that ruff, and making sure that the lines are coming down at the right angle from the right points. Working exactly the same as well. We've got our shadows. We're going to flick our lights out over onto the shadows, working from the left-hand side, the outer edge working inwards. So whenever you take an area too white, too light, you just go back in with your warm grey or one of your mid-tones and soften it back. So you see that I went in again with the white Pablo. I'm tending to go in with the white Pablo after pretty much all of the layers are down, and it just gives me that slightly brighter, thicker, more opaque white on the outer edges of those chunks of fur down there. Polychromos is working lovely, but like I say, I mean, if you haven't got the Pablo, especially if you're in the US or something, maybe your Prismacolor white might work well there. You've got your Derwent Chinese white as well, which is your brightest white. That one is a very, very cold white, but it goes on very thick and creamy. So starting to work our way up to the point where we can finally work on this cheek fur now. But first of all, obviously again then, we just need to make sure that we've got a lovely transition between the cheek and that ruff, and then up over onto the nose. And then again, we're just going to pop in, we're going to start building, finishing our underpainting really off first of all. So we're just mapping in shapes and the contrast. And then we'll put in our mid-tones as well and the colours before we start putting in the texture, and we'll work it 2 or 3 times before we bring it up, and it's lovely. So we're marking in the texture first of all using our dark. We've used our black. We've gone in with our indigo. But I need to make sure, like I say, all the fur around it is pretty much brought to completion before I then go in with my white, my lightest grey, and start putting in individual fur texture. keep an eye on your angles here as well. So keep an eye on the direction of that fur. It's very horizontal. Usually with a dog or something, it'll sweep outwards and downwards, like I'm pulling it here down along that nose. But that right underneath the eye, it is literally lifting straight up towards the left-hand corner of the eye, so it's flicking straight up. It's not coming down. And the slightest wrong angle can make a huge difference to the shape of your face. It can really throw everything out if you've got that wrong. So like I say, just keep an eye at all times on the direction of your fur, the length of your fur. Okay, so I've worked the left hand side a little bit. Now we want to come over and pull the right hand side up to similar level. And this is what I'm saying about not bringing an area to completion. If you prefer to work that way, that's fine. It's just not how I work. I like to give myself a nice allowance to go, okay, that's sort of quite happy now with where that is. I know I can leave it and come back to it and have a decent amount of layers there and tooth to be able to build and create my final detail. If you look at the texture even on the left hand side now, the difference between that and the nose and also this right hand cheek before it's worked. And also remember, this is under the light of my my drawing table, so it's not showing the true contrast colour and texture. Again, I remember over on this right hand side, some of those little spots and dots there, they might not be quite in the right place, but they're absolutely fine to me. Texture's fine. They sort of balance with the left hand side. So I didn't stress too much about the fact that maybe they don't quite match that reference photo. So same as on the left hand side, we've gone in, we've added a little bit of if we need a little bit more umber in there, we add that back in, and we go back in then with our dark indigo, and we're just mapping in those undertones that we need in place again before we add any texture. So our dark shadow texture. And you'll find as well with the nose fur, exactly like we did with the forehead fur. Remember, we just did little squiggles, little placement squiggles. Here it's just little squiggles, because I'm not trying to create, it's so stubbly and short, the fur here. We're not trying to create flicky fur, long fur. It's just little squiggles and marks with lighter pressure in some areas than in others. You also find that, say, the nose doesn't get worked a huge amount because we're not trying to create fur texture. Well, we are creating texture, but it's a different style and different texture completely to everywhere else. So no long strokes, not even really scumbling or anything. It's just literal squiggle, 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 left to right. You can probably do it a lot slower than me, but it's not even like with a dog where you've got a short fur dog. It's not even short flicks all in the same direction. I do see some people create their tigers or their leopards by using tiny little strokes of fur all in the same direction, and I don't know, it just seems too precise and perfect for something that's out in the natural world and wild. I like it a little bit rougher, and I like to try and depict it how I interpret it from the drawing, to be honest, not how I imagine or I want it to look. So it's quite stubbly. I want the sense feeling that, you know, if you rubbed that nose, that you'd have quite a stubbly, short fur there. I don't want it that you have to feel it and you're stroking it downwards in, you know, in a precise direction. So you can see here as well, I was working that right hand cheek and I sort of got distracted into coming up over the nose and working the whole of the nose, but that's what catches, you know, that's what I'm like. I try so hard to control my random way of working because I'm creating a tutorial for you, and I try to be so methodical, but sometimes it does catch me and I like, no, I needed to get the nose in. We'll come back to the cheek, and I think, well, at least if I'm going to go onto the nose, I'll try and bring it pretty much to completion, and then we'll come back and work the rest of this fur on the cheek. So again, we had a lovely little underpainting in there. All we need to go in now is to start to create the finer detail with sharp pencils. Still working from the outside in, and from the lower part up. Still using exactly the same colours that we have before. Little squiggles again now with the white. I'm just putting in some highlights. And the ivory as well, we use there. And you can see how well the Polychromos, you know, they're still going on. True to colour over the top. See how many layers we've put in over here. It's still going in beautifully. Okay, so we built up a little too much of the lightness now, so we just go back in and cut through it all with our darks. To our dark indigo and our black. Okay, so I've lifted my reference away there now so I can see the other left-hand cheek. Even though the coloration on the right-hand cheek is different, this is one of those points again where you can use your reference or you can just try and balance your own picture as well. Okay, so down to working on the nose now. You can see again where the application goes on, the roughness still of the tooth of the paper there. So we've got the cinnamon down here for the nose. You can use one of your fleshes if you like. Again, depending on how it shows up on your screen, you might see more of like, you know, a Venetian or a Pompeian red. But just check as well. I mean, if this is a piece for keeping or for whatever you want to do with it, it's just keep an eye on the light fastness when it comes to your pinks and your reds. Faber-Castell are very good with their colour fastness, and even their lowest ratings of 1 star are still up and above poor light fastness ratings of other brands. But like I say, just keep an eye and keep that in mind. Just check your star ratings. Okay, so now we've sort of got everything in place. We're doing a bit of a once over now of top to bottom, balancing of texture, balancing of highlights, contrast, sharpening things up a little bit, top to bottom. This is something that you can take a break from and then come back to and do this with completely fresh eyes. Don't try and fit in this top to bottom rework and balancing. If you've got tired eyes or you've had a long session already working on the fur and the rest of the animal. You see, this is literally tweaks now where I can use different pressure. Same with any piece as well. I mean, the piece is finished. It's finished as far as doing this tutorial goes. I'm quite happy with how much it's finished, but I might still go back in before it goes into a frame. I might still go back in and tweak him, just because I can. So we work top to bottom. Now we're going in with our slice. If you haven't got a slice, which is just a ceramic knife blade, the fine one we're using here, then just use a normal craft knife. So you should see here, this is only 2 times speed. I've slowed it down. Might be picking up on the camera. Hopefully it is. But basically, because we're working on anthracite, I'm able to create here really, really fine hair texture. It'll show more on the actual finished scan for you. But even if you can't see it on the screen, it really is cutting through and giving me a finer detail of hair and texture coming through than I could create with any pencil, no matter how sharp I got the pencil. And believe me, there was a lot of pencil dust coming off this piece. Sorry, it's just got a tiny bit out of the picture there. I think this is a case again of where my light is so bright, it's just not allowing you to see the just how much texture this is giving, which is a shame. Again, if you put a lot of pressure on, you can take it right back to the anthracite. Yeah, it's showing the texture a lot more here. Now you can see it coming through a lot better. But if you put a lighter texture through, then you can pull back some of the ochres and the indigos from underneath. So again, it's a good thing to practice with. Sometimes I use a knife at the end, sometimes I don't. But with this one, I kept it in mind that I could go back in and add those really nice details right at the end. You see me also, I'm just cutting some of the pigment out of where those whiskers are as well. You see as well that I am turning the paper. I've released the paper from the board so I can spin it, so that way you're moving your hand naturally to follow the direction that you want to take it. You can't do that if your piece is stationary and taped to your board, because you're trying to move your hand around to move it in unnatural directions. Yeah, you should be able to see there as well the texture of what we're creating. It's very, very fine, but it just adds another lovely dimension to your work that you can't achieve with just your pencils. So this is only 2 times speed, honest. It's only it's only doubled in speed. I just do it, work it so quickly, I guess. I haven't done too bad of a job of trying to keep that in in view for you all before in shot whilst I'm turning it and working quite quickly. Better than on previous attempts. Okay, so once we've done this with our knife, we'll be looking at doing the whiskers next, for which I am bring in the use of some Winsor & Newton, I believe it is. I need to double check. I think it's Winsor & Newton acrylic ink. I sometimes use it just to bring in an extra bit of bright white where I've worked on a piece that I've lost, you know, enough to. Even though I scraped it out, I've indented and I've scraped it out, we've gone over the area so much. It is quite hard to get my pencil in there nice and sharp. I do attempt to get my pencil in there super sharp, but it doesn't leave the lovely bright white whiskers that I wanted in places. So here you can see I've got the brush that I'm using is a nail art brush. I've spent a fortune on so many long brushes that will hold the enough ink or paint to be able to do this, and none of them work, or they're too thick. Even the super fine ones, they just seem too thick. So these are nail art brushes from when I used to be a nail technician, basically. You get them quite cheap on eBay. So you can see I'm literally just using the ink again, spinning the paper. And again, we're going to go back into where the follicles, where the original hairs grow out of. And also we'll go around the actual individual whiskers themselves to tidy them up a little bit. Sorry, it just slipped out of line of the view again there. But you can just see I'm just sweeping it. If it goes a little bit too translucent, I just go in with another touch over the top. And I quite like the fact that it's translucent, because when it dries it softens and you can choose then how much you want to build it up. But I do go in, let's say, with my dark indigo, my black, and also my greys, just to soften the whiskers a little bit so that they're not bright white all over. So you see here, there's a few black whiskers as well that I just want to wisp in there. So we're coming to the end of this. So this, like I say, this hour and a half summed up approximately 11 hours of drawing time, believe it or not. So if you've sat through the whole lot, then well done. Be thankful I didn't put the whole 11 hours down for you. It'd be a long night. As I say, this is the third part of the videos. If you're in the $10 and above tier, you will have access to that digital tutorial. Oh, you see here, I've got the Museum Aquarelle white here. I forgot I'd gone in with that one. It is quite a nice white. I think it's because I couldn't find my Derwent Chinese white. I'm not sure. But again, I'm just knocking them back then now with my dark sepia, my black, especially on that right hand side where it's not quite as bright. Just slowed it down now to real time. I'm just filling in the shadows around those whiskers a little bit as well. If you've got another favoured way of doing your whiskers, that's fine. That's just how I don't always use this method. It's just what I chose to use for this cat. So that's the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've learnt from it, and if you have any questions, obviously please do just ask me. But it is a case of just sort of practice this technique and have lots and lots of patience. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and like I say, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've learnt something. That's me out. Thank you.